National Disabilities Advocate Senator Andwele Boyce is a well-respected voice in the House of Parliament. He joins us this evening for an exclusive with One-on-One. Senator Boyce, welcome to the program.
Great to be here.
Very good to have you. One of the first questions I want to ask, what are the main challenges being faced by persons living with disabilities currently?
That's a tough question. I say it's a tough question because I think that the challenges are so widespread and span across many of the areas that are essential for a good quality of life. So those challenges span education, they span health, they span employment, so that it is difficult to identify any singular set of challenges because the community of persons with disabilities, I think, face so much and face so many challenges, I should say, in trying to live a good quality of life.
Last year, you've had a policy win with the passing of the National Disabilities Policy for 2023 to 2030. What are some of the core items in there that you're focusing on to see transformation in how Barbadians view persons living with disabilities?
So permit me to say that the policy spans 18 issue areas, including health and education and employment and sports and culture. So it covers a wide breadth of the issues that persons with disabilities may face. And the kind of overarching tenet is one of access, whether that's access to education, to quality education, access to employment. We are trying to beat back the devastating statistic of just approximately 90% of persons with disabilities being unemployed. Access to our physical and built infrastructure. As you walk around Barbados, you can imagine the ways in which persons with disabilities face exclusion from our built environment. And so the policy really speaks to all of that and sets out in a very dedicated way a timeline for the improvement of those realities.
You've mentioned sports and games. We've just had the Olympic Games. Obviously, the Paralympics is there as well for persons living with disabilities. In focusing on persons living with disabilities where sports and games is concerned, what does that particular aspect look like within the policy?
I think we have to appreciate where we're coming from, right? So I think there has long been a perception that persons with disabilities should not participate in sports, and because of particular challenges, because of stereotypes and that kind of a thing. And so the policy enumerates, whether it is in schools, that persons with disabilities, particularly physical disabilities or mental disabilities, participate in physical activity in the context of school. It encourages the state to create more opportunities for persons with disabilities to participate in sports generally, in competitive sports, in sport for leisure. You mentioned the Olympic Games, and one of the things that the Paralympics rather, and one of the things that the policy does and calls on the state to do is to recognize and to provide opportunities for those athletes to continue to excel and to recognize their talents on an equal basis with persons without disabilities.
And what is the general consensus like within the community that you're advocating for in terms of hope for the future now that you've had that policy win as of 2023?
I think there is hope, as you say, among the community of persons with disabilities. I think many people are still anxiously waiting to see how the implementation will unfold. But I think, no doubt, coming from an environment where there has only been a spattering of legal protection and a spattering of policy protection, the community of persons with disabilities are hopeful, and I may even go on to say energized by some of the wins that we have made recently.
You've also mentioned that you were working closely with Janelle Odell as part of the committee in pulling this policy together. What did it mean to you personally and Andwele in terms of, working with someone from the same community to come up with this policy and see it working towards becoming a bill in the House of Parliament?
So Janelle is my colleague here in the ministry. She is the other national disability advocate, and you mentioned the committee. We served on the advisory committee for improving the lives of persons with disabilities, and working along with Janelle, a colleague in many ways, is refreshing because you bring the particular skill of all of her training as an attorney, but also that lived experience as a person with a disability. And I think we complement each other well, along with all of the other individuals with whom we have worked in advancing the cause and advancing both the bill and the policy.
One of the pillars within the policy would be changes to the built environment. How soon can we see some of these changes being laid out across the landscape of Barbados?
So in relation to the built environment, I think we have to appreciate that we're coming from a far way behind. We are coming from a place where an absence of accommodations and an absence of access for persons with disabilities. And we're also contending with very limited resources as a small island state. But the government has committed to ensuring that the physical infrastructure is reformed with a view to making it more accessible to persons with disabilities. Permit me to say that the policy is over a 7-year period, as you indicated, but it is broken down into short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. So you asked about physical infrastructure, and one of the things that we will see coming out of in relation to physical infrastructure is parking spaces for persons with disabilities. You will recall that about 2 years ago now, the government earmarks about 3 or 4 spaces in the Bridgetown area. And through our conversations with the business sector, we are encouraging more entities to designate parking, to build ramps, to doing those things. I say that to make the point that this is we are going to achieve this policy over these 7 years through progressive realization, right? Everything will not be achieved at once. But what the government is committing to is inch by inch, bit by bit, with the resources that we have, improving the lives of persons with disabilities and not going back.
And not going back, that's important. In terms of immediacy, what would you like to see done within the next 3 years, between 2023 to 2024 to 2027?
Oh, wow. What's a question? I think the thing that perhaps tugs at my heart the most is education. And luckily, we are having this conversation as the government more broadly is having a conversation around education transformation. And I think that a critical component of reforming and reshaping the lives of persons with disabilities is providing access to quality education that is across the breadth of our education system, from pre-primary all the way up to tertiary education. If we can do that and empower persons with the skills and talents that they need, I think that we can refashion this country. So education is perhaps the thing that gives me the most hope. And when we talk about urgency, perhaps the thing that for me is most urgent. But I don't want to play favorites across the 18 issue areas of the policy and the multiple provisions of the bill. But for me, education is the thing.
What does that look like for you where education reform is concerned for persons living with disabilities?
So there is across the education sector, both locally and internationally, a thrust towards greater integration. And what it means in its broadest sense is that a person with a disability is not hamstrung in the education system by whatever their disability happens to be. Too often and for a very long time, a diagnosis of any kind of disability would mean that you do not matriculate, quote unquote, normally throughout the education system, regardless of your abilities. And what the government, through education transformation and certainly coming out of the policy, is intending to do is ensuring that every child, regardless of their disability, achieves their maximum potential through the use of aids and assistive technologies and accommodations in the classroom, so that every child has access to a Barbadian education system that has served us well, and whatever dreams and aspirations that flow from that.
Well, you've touched on integration. What does an inclusive education system look like in terms of persons living with disabilities learning alongside normal students, quote unquote?
Cool. It looks like assistive technology in the classroom. It looks like paraprofessionals in the classroom to the extent that that is required. It looks like individual educational plans where a cross-section of professionals sit down and consider the abilities of a particular individual and then plan out the ways in which they can best achieve their educational goals. It looks like every Barbadian child having access to education and not being hamstrung, like I said earlier, in the achievement of their dreams.
There's a case with a student who's hearing impaired from the Irvin Wilson School. His mother is considering migrating to Canada because of the limited opportunities in Barbados. With progressive policies such as the one you've been working on, the National Disability Policy for 2023 to 2030, what advice would you have for her in terms of looking for opportunities but hearing of promises of a progressive policy?
Let me begin by saying that I understand the worries of a parent and certainly looking for the best set of opportunities for their child. The Barbados we're working towards is a Barbados that would have the accommodations and the opportunities for her child. And I don't think it is my place to ask her to stay, but certainly to not give up hope on the Barbados that we're trying to build. Yeah.
Which pillars within the policy would assist a student, like the boy in question, the 17-year-old boy that we've discussed?
So I think it is difficult to opine on such limited facts, but what I will say is that if he is 17 years old and getting ready to head into the labor market, as most individuals of that age are, then there are considerations in the bill around quotas, for instance, asking that both within the private sector and the public sector that employers hire a certain quantity of persons with disabilities who meet all of the other qualification requirements and that kind of a thing. So if that is the challenge, then the policy responds to that. If it is education, certainly, like I indicated earlier, the policy speaks to quality education with all of the necessary accommodations from primary all the way through until tertiary. So we won't get there in a hurry, but we're working towards it.
In touching on entrepreneurship, we're speaking of the 17-year-old boy and entering the labor market. Which elements of the policy provide support for persons within the disabled community who are interested in leading companies, leading organizations?
So the policy So the policy would permit the training, speaks to training in the context of employment. It speaks to adult education to the extent that that is required. And there are provisions in both the policy and the law that would encourage entrepreneurship by persons with disabilities, and would give them access to things like the trust loans to which we have become accustomed over the last couple of years and that kind of a thing. So there are a number of tenets that speak to entrepreneurship for persons with disabilities, if indeed they're so inclined.
Mm-hmm. With the passage of Hurricane Beryl and looking at disaster risk management, what do the partnerships look like in terms of your work with organizations such as the Department of Emergency Management and providing and catering for persons who are living with disabilities?
So it's interesting that you asked that, because one of our very recent meetings as the national advocates meet with ministries has been with the Ministry of Home Affairs. And I know that one of the things they're engaging in is geomapping of vulnerable populations with a view to ensuring that they're best protected or best taken out of dangerous situations if that is what is required. And of course, one of those populations would of course be people with disabilities of varying kinds. So we are absolutely partnering with the Ministry of Home Affairs, as we are with the entire government. But I know that one of the thrusts specifically is geomapping. And given all of our conversation around climate change and around the challenges of a small island developing state surrounded by water. And it is one of the things that we are working on in this ministry, is prioritizing.
In speaking of retrofitted properties and infrastructural development, where within the policy speaks to, or is there any call on corporate Barbados to assist in such a process with limited resources by the government?
So the government of Barbados does not propose to do any of this alone, whether it is the retrofitting of properties or any other part of the policy. In specific relation to the retrofitting of properties, the bill calls on persons with private sector individuals, owners of property, to make those properties more accessible to persons with disabilities. When we talk about accessibility, we often think of ramps, but we're also thinking about things like braille in your elevators, or a number of things that make the environment more accessible, emergency exits that may illuminate for the aid of persons who are deaf or hearing impaired, those kinds of things. And so it is a collaborative approach. If I want to say anything to you, it is that it is a collaborative approach, and that the government does not propose to do any of this alone.
How would you rate the strides the island has made from last year to this year since the policy was passed?
I might be a little biased, having worked so hard on it. But I think that we have made extraordinary strides, and that the thing now is to continue that work and to implement that work, and the government is committed to doing that. We are coming from a situation where, like I said, we have had only a spattering of legal protections and only a spattering of policy recognition, and now we're moving towards comprehensive law and policy. So I think that the task is Herculean, but the strides that we have made are also amazing, if I say so myself.
Have you faced any criticism from those within policy in terms of items that you should have focused on more within the policy? What were some of the, what is the general feedback like?
I think the general feedback is that the policy and the law are both comprehensive, let me take you back a little bit and say that when the commission was named, what we refer to as the Hinkson Commission, chaired by MP Edmund Hinkson, we engaged on very wide consultations. We met with the ministries, departments, and agencies of government. We met with the civil society organizations, trade unions, members of the disabled community. We then went out into public town halls so that both the policy and the law have benefits, so that the policy has benefited from very wide consultation. And I think that there is general consensus that it represents where Barbados needs to go, and it represents the very best of what we can achieve.
What does the timeline look like for the draft bill to go to Parliament to become law?
It certainly is the expectation of this ministry that it will go to the Parliament before the end of 2024.
And what would that look like then before the end of next year? What other changes would we have to expect?
I think we will expect a set of cultural changes because, static law is fine and it would be something to celebrate. What we have to do is to shift culture in Barbados as it relates to persons with disabilities. I think for many Barbadians, you kind of tacitly recognize that persons with disabilities should not be discriminated against. But I don't think we have expanded our conception sufficiently to include what does really including a person with a disability look like across our society, and what will it require of you as a person without a disability for persons with disabilities to be included? How do you, at an individual level, have to change your behavior so that a person with a disability is included and has full access to their rights? And I think that is the kind of cultural work that is going to be important.
With 90% of those within the disabled community unemployed, unfortunately, what would it take for us to work in terms of changing the psyche of how employers view the inclusion of talented persons, just differently abled? What would it take to change the psyche of?
It takes that cultural work. It takes seeing persons for their talents and abilities and the contributions that they can make, and not seeing their disability, and certainly not perceiving at a broader level that somebody else will take care of them, right?
Exactly.
And that they don't need to earn because there is someone else in their families, close to them, the state, whoever, that will contribute to their well-being, and an appreciation instead that persons with disabilities have their own dreams and aspirations and have their own perception of success for themselves that includes, like everybody else, having a job and being able to support yourself.
There are a lot of persons within the community that you advocate for who have skills, talents, and abilities that they can bring to the table. Do you know what are some of the areas that persons are hoping to fill? And for those who are interested in entrepreneurship, which businesses most persons within the community are interested in pursuing?
So that is not information readily available to us. I think one of the challenges of only having a spattering of legal protections and policy is that we don't necessarily have a proper data set of the skills and abilities of persons with disabilities. But it is something, the policy speaks to the importance of data, because we don't make up social policy.
Yes.
And the interventions are going to be targeted, and such that they need to be targeted, they need to be driven by data. And one of the things that the policy, both the policy and the bill proposes, is the development of a strong data set that will include the skills, talents, and abilities of persons with disabilities.
Senator Boyce, it's been a joy speaking with you on your work on social intervention representing persons living with disabilities. At this time, we must take a break, but we'll be right back with Senator Andwele Boyce.
Yo, this is your boy Mikey Mercer here. I was born in the city, I was raised in the city, and I love performing in the city, but you know what? I don't like to see it dirty. And that's the horrible thing about litter. Litter just mess up everything and quite look bad. Don't let the place look bad. Make it look nice. Barbados is a beautiful place. So let's keep the city clean. A clean city starts with me, and a clean city starts with you.
Do you have a query, complaint, compliment, or just a simple suggestion relating to a government service? If you do, then the Citizen Services Contact Center, or CSCC, is here for you. What is it? As part of the government's commitment to providing citizen-centric governance, this initiative has been designed to make it more convenient for Barbadians to voice concerns, file complaints, and offer suggestions about government services, all from the comfort of their own homes. You can reach the Citizen Services Contact Center by telephone at 573-7373 or by email at messagegovt@barbados.gov.bb. You also have the choice to WhatsApp the center at 266-4242. The CSCC operates between the hours of 7 a.m. and 9 p.m., Monday to Saturday. Again, the CSCC contacts are 573-7373 for calls, message govt@barbados.gov.bb for emails, and 266-4242 for WhatsApp.
Barbadians, we invite you to get involved and play your part as we clean and green Barbados. Come into your community with media launches, bulk waste collection exercises, community engagement sessions, and giveaways. Get on board. Let's keep Barbados clean and green.
Beautiful, beautiful Barbados.
Welcome back to this very special one-on-one with Senator Andwele Boyce. Senator Boyce, with 90% of the disabled community unemployed, what would it take for them to become part of the employed stock in terms of percentage, bringing that percentage down?
It takes a reimagining of society. It takes a cultural shift. It takes a commitment by society broadly to recognize the abilities of persons with disabilities, to recognize that there's acumen and there's intellect and there's something to contribute to Barbadian society, whether that's in the private sector or in the government. It will, in a more dedicated way, require that persons consider and adhere to things like quotas. It will require a commitment to providing the accommodations that are necessary. I say all the time that I think COVID taught us that much of the things that we do around employment can be shifted, can be changed, can be rejigged. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that things like work from home are necessary, or the provision of assistive technologies are necessary, then that is what it is going to require. But at the most fundamental level, I think it requires a cultural shift.
Do you think a focus should also be placed on extensive training in terms of readying those persons for the job market as well? Is there a lack of training in existence? Hence the percentage for persons living with disabilities.
We began by talking about the absence of opportunity. And so just like everything else, there may well be an absence of training. And it will require that state agencies, that the entities that provide that training consider including persons with disabilities in those trainings so as to ensure that they are job ready. Like I said, I say it requires a reconception of our society, and it is not a reconception that one of us or one group of us has to have. It really is all of us, because we have lived in a Barbados for 57 years with very little that responds to the needs of persons with disabilities. And so, yeah, all of us are going to have to think afresh about Barbadian society and what it requires to include persons with disabilities.
Are you satisfied with the assistance from international organizations in terms of funding locally for the disabled community?
I think international development organizations have been partners of the government on these issues. We certainly would encourage them to participate, we certainly would encourage them to contribute more. And as the policy is rolled out, we will no doubt look forward to their greater contribution.
Is there any hope for facilities for para-athletes as well?
Sports for persons with disabilities is comprehensively addressed in the country's national sports policy. And that policy conceives of accessible facilities that would make it easier for persons with disabilities to access and to participate in those facilities, so that we are all awaiting with bated breath a new national stadium. And it certainly is our expectation that that facility will be accessible to persons with disabilities, including in the other facilities that are newly constructed in the area of sports.
On the topic of sports and healthy living, in Barbados, obviously, we are facing a fight where 80% of our premature deaths are as a result of non-communicable diseases. What provisions do we have currently within the policy in terms of addressing the NCD fight within the policy?
So I have said to you that sports is a tenet of both the policy and the law, and we appreciate the extent to which active living, being active while living, is an important component to the reduction of NCDs. But also access to quality healthcare is a critical component as well, and the policy and the law speaks to that. When we talk about the provision of healthcare services, it really goes beyond making sure that ramps and facilities are available for persons with disabilities, but part of that reimagining and part of that expansion has to include potentially sign language interpreters in our healthcare facilities. Because what does it mean for a person who is deaf to interact with their healthcare provider in the current context? So that I think there are multiple initiatives aimed at ensuring the reduction of NCDs and the provision of a quality of life for persons with disabilities.
You speak evidently of a supportive family, life with your brothers and your mother and your dad as well. But not everybody from the disabled community has this support. What, in terms of your work, how would that additional support come in for persons who don't have this family support? And obviously the support and buttress of a family could definitely help a person to either plummet or to soar.
For the individuals who do not have it, there are, to the extent that their challenges as a result of not having it rise to the level of needing care, then the government is contemplating the expansion of facilities for persons with disabilities. But I think that part of the cultural work to which I refer is or will lead to a recognition by neighbors and friends and individuals more broadly that they can contribute where that support system doesn't exist. You are correct when you say that a good support system leads to a good quality of life. And the thrust of the government is to move away from institutionalization and certainly to a space in which Barbadians, through state action, through the action of our civil society organizations, step up and contribute to the quality of life of persons with disabilities who may not have a support system.
And Barbados is considered a very friendly and peaceable society, and mental health has been named as a hot topic coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes.
What are some of the greater concerns for persons living with disabilities where their mental health is concerned?
The overarching concern for persons with disabilities in relation to mental health comes from the widespread exclusion. And what does it mean to live in a society that doesn't really recognize you for your abilities and your talents? And what does that feel like at different stages of your life, right? And so there has to be a dedicated approach to improving the mental health of persons with disabilities, improving the mental health of Barbadians more broadly, and having the difficult conversations and seeing how we can support individuals in the improvement and maintenance of the improvement of their mental health and the maintenance of good mental health.
For persons at home watching one-on-one right now on Television 8, and maybe they're in a community where there are persons living with disabilities, what are some of the actions that they can take to include this person more in a real way, in a way that starts with maybe a hello, or what should that look like?
Absolutely. There is no standard way. Engage with that person. Talk to that person. See what that person likes and dislikes. There's no textbook way to engage with persons with disabilities. Of course, I encourage you to be kind to people and to be warm, but there's not one way, because the community of persons with disabilities is not a monolith. So your approach to me may carry one and inspire one response, and your approach to another person and carries and inspires another response. But I think it is about people perceiving that you are genuinely interested. And that begins with, a hello, as you indicated, how are you doing, in the way that we do it every day, and being genuinely interested in people's answers, and perhaps seeing how you can assist if indeed you can.
Barbados has just celebrated 50 years of crop over. The season of emancipation would have just climaxed. Are we truly emancipated or free if our most vulnerable feel as if they are still enchained to some degree?
I love this question. The answer is no, but the work is ongoing. I don't think that a state, a country reaches any one place where we feel like all of us are included. The project of democracy requires that we look continuously at what we have achieved and look continuously at what is yet to be achieved. And so 57 years have passed without the adequate protections for persons with disabilities, but that exists in the context of a Barbadian society where we're grappling with all sorts of other concerns. And so the answer to you is no, but the work is definitely ongoing.
We've had the likes of Senator Kerry-Ann Eiffel, Janelle obviously involved in politics as well, Janelle Odo, and yourself as well, along with some others. Should we give greater consideration to including those from within the disabled community in our policy process and in our politics as well, and governance?
Yes. I think the perspective of persons with disabilities, not only as people with disabilities, because I think very often we think of disability conversations and disability considerations as these discrete things over to the left of our national discourse, divorced from economic considerations, divorced from considerations about home and family life, divorced from broader considerations that every other Barbadian has. And I think that the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the policymaking space and in the legislative process permits us to expand our conception again and to create a better Barbados, trying ever to be more inclusive and to, I think, remove our blind spots where they have previously existed.
We're currently experiencing a rise in criminal activity, according to some reports. What are your thoughts on the training needed for service personnel regarding taking complaints from those within the disabled community and understanding some of the real issues that we're facing?
I think you touched on it. We need to train more of our emergency personnel more broadly, but specifically the Barbados Police Service in engaging with members of the community who may end up on various sides of the law, but who need access to justice, access to the ability to complain and to be, protected and reassured like everybody else. And what does that look like? It looks like training officers in sign language. It looks like ensuring that interpreters are available to the force. It looks like ensuring that they understand the very basic disability etiquette of, what to call people and those kinds of things. So it is an ongoing conversation that we need to have, an important conversation that we need to have, because I think it implicates access to justice in a real way.
Are you satisfied with the general education in terms of disabled etiquette and the correct terms that we should use for persons from the community? Are you concerned, or are you considering that we need to educate persons more?
I think well as a communications professional that education has to continue. That is a continuing process. And we are coming from a place where we used to call people with disabilities very disparaging things. Things we have come to learn are very disparaging. And fundamentally, I say around, what you call people what they want to be called. I think Barbadians, because we've had, very robust media campaigns dating back that talk about calling people particular things like differently abled and that kind of a thing, that is now etched in our memory.
Yes.
And we can't necessarily get away from it, or it's difficult to get away from it. The bill and the policy uses person first language. So you will see the term person with disabilities, because it really is a more accurate descriptor of what you're talking about. You're literally talking about a person with a disability, but I am a person first. And so perhaps that is the language that we should be moving towards. But my overarching thing is call people what they want to be called.
From your days at Ellerslie, at the Ellerslie Secondary School, how would you rate the growth seen in terms of your days back then and now as a senator, in terms of how persons with disabilities, young persons, are being treated generally?
There has been some growth, but I don't think that we have gone far enough. And certainly I don't think that we have gone far enough for the time that has passed. So we began by talking about education transformation, and I think one of the critical components of that is allowing persons to matriculate through the school who, according to their abilities, we still live in an environment where many persons with disabilities access to education in various ways is impeded on the basis of their disability, and that's what we have to move away from. So in my view, we have made some progress. You can call a couple of names and say, you know, those are the standouts and the and that kind of a thing, but I do not fool myself into thinking that that list should not be a great deal longer, that there are not a great more persons with disabilities who have not had the opportunities that some of us have had, and have the ability to contribute to Barbadian society in much the same way.
Between now and 2030, since the National Disability Policy was passed last year, what are the efforts, what are the targeted efforts that are going to be made to see more than 10% of those from your community entering various stages with various places within the job market?
So I think I won't venture a particular percentage other than to tell you that I would wish that it is significantly reduced for all of the reasons that we have discussed. I think because of the lack of data, it is difficult to say and to forecast. But we would wish for persons with disabilities, the level of unemployment to be comparable to the national level, or to be more in sync with the national level of unemployment. And what will it require? It will require employers hiring persons with disabilities. It will require institutions training and upskilling persons with disabilities. It will require all of us.
Do you think we have what it takes to be a pillar of excellence in terms of persons living with disabilities working within the digital sphere or with remote type jobs in terms of forward-thinking ventures?
The thing about challenges or crises is that they present opportunities, and I think Barbados has always been at the forefront of turning a crisis and a challenge into a comparative advantage. And certainly I hope that not only in relation to the digital space, but that through the promulgation of the law and policy, that we create a great deal of comparative advantages for the community of persons with disabilities, but also for Barbados more generally. Because I say all the time that this is not only about improving the lives of persons with disabilities, it really is about improving Barbados. If we improve the level of unemployment, the level of employment for persons with disabilities, we improve Barbados's economic standing, right? We lessen the weight on the state to provide support. So this is really about creating a better Barbados in very broad terms.
Do we need to see special programs at, say, the University of the West Indies and the Samuel Jackman Institute of Technology for specifically for persons with disabilities? I know you've mentioned integration and inclusive education. Or do we make that call for persons with disabilities to pursue tertiary education and further on?
I think fundamentally the thing is that there's need for greater educational opportunities across the sector. And whether that is tertiary education in the traditional way that we think about it, or that is vocational training, which may also be attractive to persons with disabilities, those opportunities need to exist. And to the extent that the University of the West Indies or the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute can support those initiatives and support a move towards that, absolutely.
How can we see the inclusion of nurses who are living with disabilities or doctors who are living with disabilities? How do we create that enabling environment while working on the psyche of Barbadians in terms of that inclusion going forward?
I think we have to create greater opportunities for persons with disabilities to apply to those in those areas. I think part of the challenge has been in such an exclusionary society that sometimes as a person with a disability, you don't think that particular things are for you. And so you limit your own aspirations based on what you think the society is willing to bear. But I encourage anyone with any kind of aspiration to, shoot for the stars and encourage those institutions, the institutions that train doctors and nurses and police officers and any other kind of professional to be accessible to persons with disabilities, to conceive that a person with a disability can be a professional in that space and contribute their skills, talents, and abilities to the profession. Sometimes we engage in rigor for rigor's sake. And when I say that, I mean, we think that things need to be difficult because they need to be difficult and not because it serves any particular purpose. And I think in our reimagining of society, that is one of the things we're going to have to consider, both at the level of our educational institutions and at the level of employment. Because are you doing that thing because you have always done that thing? Are you doing that thing because it has some real and legitimate effect on producing a better professional at the end of the day? Those are questions we have to answer.
Is there any concern within the disabled community that persons living with disabilities need to be included more in the cultural arts, or is there any interest for them to be included more as music producers, dance choreographers?
So I think the skills, talents, and abilities of persons with disabilities really span the gamut, and there are some individuals who are persons with disabilities, who are performers and who are creatives. And one of the conversations that we're having with the ministry, with the relevant ministries, is ensuring that there are opportunities for them. I spoke in one of my Senate presentations about the fact that I used to play the violin as a child and would love to see more persons with disabilities in our national youth orchestras or in our national steel orchestra and across the cultural sector. This year we saw a person who was blind performing in the Pick of the Crop competition, in the finals of the Pick of the Crop competition. And that is extraordinary, and we certainly do need to see more of that. And I think that will happen the more we shift society into recognizing the talent of persons with disabilities.
What would you say were the enabling factors in your life that have cultivated and encouraged you to